November 2006. Let's jump right into the books. The first book that I read in November of 2006 is Slither by Edward Lee, a nice leisure paperback, and one of my favorite Edward Lee books. It's about killer worms, giant killer worms. A group of scientists go to this island, and there's some dead bodies, and then the scientists start disappearing. And, it's giant killer worms, but it's much more than that. I still hadn't read, except for The Teratologist, hadn't really read any of Edward Lee's extreme horror, the super extreme stuff. The leisure stuff pushes the envelope, but definitely not as far as Edward Lee can and does go. But my penchant for killer animal stories, giant killer worms, and then that Edward Lee spin on what's going on. Another book, I say this all the time, another one that I want to reread sometime soon. But Slither by Edward Lee. And the next book that I read in November of 2006 was Infinite Crisis by Greg Cox. This is a novelization of the Infinite Crisis miniseries from DC Comics, as well as a few other things. It actually lists, it says additional material was adapted from or inspired by Aquaman number 37, Day of Vengeance, Infinite Crisis Special number 1, Gotham Central number 38, JLA 119, JSA Classified number 4, the Ran Thanagar War Infinite Crisis Special number 1, Teen Titans number 32, and Wonder Woman second series number 23 and number 24. So Infinite Crisis is the follow-up to the classic Crisis on Infinite Earths, and that maxi series, Crisis on Infinite Earths, basically destroyed the DC multiverse. And so you simply had a single Earth with a mix of different heroes from the multiverse, the surviving heroes. But there's a pocket universe where a few other Superboy Prime, Alex Luthor, and a version of Superman, I can't remember which one, but there's a few others survivors in this pocket universe, and they decide they don't like the way things turned out. But this has all sorts of stuff. We have the shocking death of a character, although I don't think it's actually in here. It's mentioned because it's part of the larger story. And the JLA Watchtower has been destroyed. The Trinity, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, are not literally, but figuratively at each other's throats. And this giant threat comes from outside. And it's a big story, tons and tons of characters. And I think Greg Cox does a decent job, if I remember correctly, a decent job of taking tons of material and basically boiling it down to its essence and giving us the core of the story. It's Infinite Crisis by Greg Cox. After that, we have Mandibles by Jeff Strand. I don't have a copy of this anymore. This is the first Jeff Strand that I ever read. It's about giant killer fire ants down in Florida, and I think it's Miami, but I'm not sure. And I think there's some other stuff too that I don't want to mention. In case you haven't read it, you can be surprised by some other elements in the story. But basically, horror, comedy, killer animals, but very funny. Definitely made an impression on me, as you'll see in upcoming videos. And I had the old edition with the cover that looked like it had the same look as like original Tomb Raider video game, that very sort of blocky look. But there's a new edition out with a pretty nice cover. But giant killer fire ants down in Florida with some surprises and lots of laughs. Mandibles by Jeff Strand. The penultimate book that I read in November of 2006 was Helltown by Dennis O'Neil, part of the DC Universe series, which was only 4 books, I think. But I dig the covers. And this is about one of my favorite comic book characters, The Question. It is a retelling of The Question's origin. Dennis O'Neil had a classic run as the writer of The Question for DC. The character was originally created by Steve Ditko for Charlton Comics, and then when DC acquired them, Dennis O'Neil did this Question series, and they brought these Charlton characters in as part of Infinite Crisis, coincidentally. But it was like Blue Beetle, Captain Atom, The Question, Phantom Lady, I believe, and some others that I can't remember. They're all analogous to Watchmen. I've talked about this before. Alan Moore wanted to use the Charlton heroes in Watchmen. DC said, no, we have plans for them. It's basically like Rorschach is Alan Moore's version of The Question. Silk Spectre is Phantom Lady. Night Owl, is that his name? Is Blue Beetle. But anyway, this is not exactly the same as the origin of The Question in Dennis O'Neil's comic book story. It's similar, but there are some major differences. So it's an alternate origin story, which I enjoy very much. I actually reread this not that long ago, and there's a review of it on my channel. Helltown by Dennis O'Neil. And the final book that I read in November of 2006 was Dead City by Joe McKinney. This is the first in a 4-book series, and it's a zombie novel. San Antonio, Texas, is devastated by just a shit ton of hurricanes. Actually, I happen to have this. Battered by 5 cataclysmic hurricanes in 3 weeks, the Texas Gulf Coast and half of the Lone Star State is reeling from the worst devastation in history. Is what it says on Amazon. This leads to a viral outbreak that brings the dead back to life. And our main character is a cop, a San Antonio cop named Eddie Hudson. And so it's a zombie novel. And I don't believe I read any of the other ones. It wasn't a terrible zombie novel, but there was absolutely nothing about it that compelled me to continue with the series. I'm almost certain we're not going to see any more Joe McKinney in any of these videos. But, if you're a huge zombie fan, apparently it was popular enough to get 4 books in the series. Maybe check it out. It just wasn't for me. And that's everything I read in November of 2006. Not quite as sparse as the last couple months. 5 books in November versus the 3 in October and 3 in September. The numbers are going to start going up a little bit as I look ahead. I see the numbers climbing. Excuse me. There's another couple of months that don't have that many, but sometimes life gets in the way. Excuse me. Question for the video: what's your favorite zombie novel? Have we discussed this before? I really can't remember. After all of the videos that I've made, I don't recall. I feel like we have, but let's talk about it again. I'm an old man with a failing memory. I think mine off the bat has to be The Rising by Brian Keene. I love that book. I love what he did with zombies. I I do like it more than Dead City, and uh, he's got the zombie novel that's not tied into The Rising that I can't remember the name of. If I could read, all I see is the word dead. I know it's Dead something. Dead Sea. Really enjoyed that one as well, but The Rising still has a special place for me. Um, I have to read more story. I can't remember what it's called, but he's got the short story collections for The Rising, selected scenes from the end of the world, and then there's the new one, which I think is more selected scenes from the end of the world, which I have, but I haven't read it yet. And there might be either another Dead Sea or another Rising book that I haven't read yet, that I have, but I haven't read yet. I'm not the biggest zombie fan, but The Rising is my pick. What about you? What is your favorite zombie novel? Let me know in the comments below. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning. Try to be polite here on my channel. Please like, share, and subscribe. All the usual YouTube stuff. If you care to follow me on other social media, I'll have links for my Instagram and Bluesky in the description below. That's all I have for this week. So until next week, read more books.